Hello, this is Brian with Allen Engineering, and today we're going to be talking about the different variations of the Gordon Carbine. To fully understand why we see different styles of the Gordon Carbine, we need to look back at the history of the suppressors that go on them. So the original suppressor that went on the Gordon Carbine was an optic suppressor. Many people believe that was a 5.56 variant of the third model, but this suppressor actually predates the third model and was never given a model designation because it was made in such few numbers. It was later named the M4 suppressor because of its use on M4 carbines. So right here I have an M4 suppressor on one of our carbines. And so this is actually going to be a 14.5 carbine length. And you'll see here, it mounts over the barrel about 4.5 inches. The M4 is also a direct thread model and uses the 3-piece long collar to mount to the front sight block. Since the M4 is the earliest optic suppressor currently in production, it actually uses a slightly different taper than the rest of the Allen Engineering series of suppressors. The taper is going to be slightly smaller, so you will not be able to use the M4 suppressor on any standard Allen Engineering collar. It is important to note that the M4 suppressor was never a contracted suppressor for the general infantry and was never really mass adopted into the military. Instead, it was specifically made for certain special forces units such as Delta operators and Rangers. So with that being said, why do we see different versions of the Gordon Carbine? Right now we see a lot of people build their Gordon Carbines using a 12.5 inch barrel with an AEM5 suppressor. This goes back to the M4 not being a mass adopted suppressor. It was never used and seen by many people, and therefore it wasn't in the public eye. So why do we see different versions of the Gordon Carbine nowadays? The story starts back in 2001 with the release of the film Blackhawk Down. This movie depicted the events of the Battle of Mogadishu and Gothic Serpent and showed the heroic actions of Master Sergeant Gary Gordon and Sergeant First Class Randy Shugart. This brought Gary Gordon's carbine into the public eye. While the rifle shown in the movie wasn't completely accurate to what he actually used, it brought the Gordon Carbine into the public eye. A lot of people wanted to replicate that gun because of its ties to that historical event and Gary's heroic actions. When people went to replicate the Gordon Carbine, they found that the M4 suppressor was actually difficult to find. This is due to it not being a very popular suppressor beforehand. Therefore, Bill and Ron didn't really make them in large quantities for civilian use. Instead, what was actually quite available was the OpSync 12th model or the AEM5. Ron was actually making these in relatively larger numbers for civilian usage. Since the AEM5 shares a very similar form factor as the M4, a lot of people realized that they could substitute the M4 with the AEM5. So I actually have an AEM5 here on another carbine, and we will see that it uses a 12.5 inch barrel with the use of a brake and collar. These ones will specifically use the short collar. While it is not completely accurate to what Gary Gordon used on his carbine, it does share very similar aesthetics and a very similar form factor. So since many people were therefore building their Gordon Carbine rifles with AEM5s in a 12.5 inch barrel, a lot of the public perception became that that was what was actually used, but in fact it was not. So at the end of 2023, we started making the M4 suppressor again in larger numbers. We've seen that a lot of people have wanted to build an accurate representation of what was used during those historical events. We have seen the M4 grow in popularity. So while there are lots of different other small variations between different Gordon Carbine builds, this is probably the biggest and most significant difference. The use of either the M4 suppressor on a 14.5 inch barrel or the AEM5 on a 12.5 inch barrel. If you have any other questions about the different Gordon Carbines or how to build one yourself, please visit aesuppressors.com.
Gordy's gone, man. I'll be outside. Good luck.